Kuba, you had some questions, so you want to follow up with that?
Yes. So you, in the series, you show how the 30 Years' War was one of the major events that was driving the end of the feudal mode of production and the rise of this incipient capitalist form. Um, do you think that without the 30 Years' War or an event like that, you'd have the same transition, or was it a forcing mechanism that induced
Uh,
uh, the creation of a new mode of production?
that's a very good question. I don't think you necessarily need the 30 Years' War as we got it. This dispute over the Holy Roman Empire, but I do think you would have to have some sort of major conflagration, which I think was going to happen given the conditions of the early 17th century, specifically feudalism and terminal crisis, plus the advent of the climate catastrophe of the Little Ice Age.
Mhm.
That combination, that confluence, led these contradiction-driven systems of rule to come into conflict with one another, and by fighting, build these new state capacities that are what really do birth capitalism. Capitalism ends up being a state project of states that were built in the process of fighting this war. And because the Holy Roman Empire is the most feudal of the feudal dynasties overruling Western Europe at that time, it's the one that had the deepest political crisis that led to the greatest amount of bloodshed.
And maybe picking up on that, when just to give people an overview in the 30 Years' War, who are the good guys? Who are the bad guys? Who is fighting who? Since every conflict needs to be compared to World War II, which side was Nazi Germany? Which side was the plucky Brits? Which side was Imperial Japan?
Well, speaking of the C.V. Wedgwood's book. C.V. Wedgwood was a British historian, and she wrote that book, I believe, in the 30s. So, and she was British, and so the whole thing is very much written in that context of the emerging crisis around Germany. And there is a through line of the book that, if the other powers of Western Europe, specifically the British, had stepped in and checked the Habsburgs earlier, you wouldn't have had a 30 Years' War. And it's their fecklessness that leads to it. And you can see her, reacting to the contemporary moment of the Munich crisis and everything when she was writing that book. And that's why, our understanding of every historical era is going to be fixed by our historical era. Like, because when I look at the 30 Years' War, as I say, I see like climate crisis and collapse of institutions from within, because I live at a different historical juncture. So she would definitely say the Habsburgs are the Nazis. Ferdinand II, the Holy Roman Emperor, fucking Hitler. If you're a historical materialist, if you're dialectical, if you're like, we had to go through capitalism had to be birthed to get socialism. So the progressive force then is the one driving towards capitalism, and that would make the good guys the Dutch, and
Impossible.
it would definitely make the all the Catholic forces, Spain specifically, the bad guys, because they're holding back, they're clawing away. Now, if you're romantic though, and you see the social value in the sacred spaces of feudal Europe, and you look at the horror of their destruction by capitalism and our failure to build anything other than that, anything on top of them. Well, if you have that kind of romantic spirit, I think you probably have some sympathy for the Habsburgs. Philip II of Spain, who's like a figure in the lead up, is a very tragic figure because he's the guy who tried to actually be a Catholic king in full, and it just made him the most miserable man in Europe.
And
The
Elon Musk.
the Obama of the Habsburg Empire, because he came to power and he just couldn't change the ship, and his heart was sad, so he had to go on and get a Netflix deal. But yeah, so I mean, that's how I feel about those monarchs in ancient age. But I think that's an important distinction, especially in the Anglo-Saxon world. The association between Catholicism and political reaction is not accidental. This kind of stereotype that exists in Britain. I mean, in Britain, we have a day where we burn a Catholic
Yep.
and have fireworks. It's like the best time to get a baked potato in public while you watch us burn
Baked potatoes, incidentally, just the term for the remains of an Irish that's been burned at the stake.
fresh meat. We can't afford post Brexit. We can't afford
no potatoes.
Can't afford any of that stuff. But it's been transferred into the United States. I mean, anti-Catholicism has been a strong strain in American political the political tradition, especially this view that Catholicism, which I think you really explain well, Catholicism as a supranational force that influences these states and creates quite secular reasons why there is a kind of hostility amongst certain elements of society who chafe under this supranational force, whether that's the opportunist German princes like the Elector of Saxony, or whether that's the middle class in the town who are sick of being beholden to an authority that.
Although I was quite interested to find out that one of the early markets driving the adoption of the printing press was Indulgences.
Indeed, yeah. It was the only real reliable source of income for a printer. Every book you published was a huge gamble with no insurance backing it. If you print 500 copies of a book and nobody wants to read it, you are out all the money. And there's no way to recoup it. But Indulgences, an order from the government, hey, I need 500,000 indulgences to send to these rubes so that we can build a cathedral. That's a guaranteed income that you can keep a press going with.
Oh, it's
and then all those presses immediately switched to printing Lutheran tracts as soon as it was clear that was the best ticket in the market and the most guaranteed source of profit.
Yeah, it's the shift from government contracts to an influencer economy.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. You have that was another fascinating dynamic that was teased out, because when you read about the failure, for example, of the printing press in the Middle East, you have a lot of cultural explanations that there was a hostility, which really, if you look at the reality, there was not that kind of hostility to printing. It just wasn't profitable.
Exactly.
Right? It just wasn't making money. There were non-Islamic presses operating in the Ottoman Empire. It's just nobody had really found a way to monetize it. But the great paradox that you show is that the Catholic Church's increasing commercialization leads into this like Protestant Reformation, like on a material basis, like a hand in a glove. Like there's a kind of continuity that exists, that both sides in this conflict are in effect being fundamentally transformed by the economic system and context within their within which they're operating. And it's not simply a question of reactionary Catholics and progressive Protestants.
Yeah, absolutely. Like the Catholic states, by continuously competing with one another, are creating these state structures that then are pulled further, by subsections within that have like a particular economic base to work from, like the Dutch.
Mm-hmm.
And then they start pushing away from it. And then you see that movement move to Germany, and you see the petty princes of the Holy Roman Empire trying to assert the same autonomy that the Dutch are trying to assert from the Habsburgs in Spain, and the Huguenots are trying to do from the French crown. And because the institutions are so long enduring and have created such deep wealth,
mm-hmm.
And therefore state capacity, but no administrative control, this continuation of feudal principalities with this putative overlord, the emperor, who is by this point no longer seen as a neutral arbiter of disputes among the princes, but a partisan of a war between the Catholic and Protestant forces in Europe. They see this as an opportunity to throw off the shackles entirely and to become, like this new type of state. And the Catholics then have to battle with this Frankenstein that they created.
So you've mentioned the religious drive within the conflict, as well as the importance of the Holy Roman Empire as an institution. And also for our listeners, the map of Europe looked very different at this point.
Yeah.
The certain countries that we take for granted as being integral to European history hadn't even emerged or hadn't formed. For instance, there was no unified Germany, no unified Italy, and the Dutch were still fighting their 80 Years' War to assert some kind of independence from the Habsburg crown. What it's difficult enough to understand the difference in material life between a period of history like the 30 Years' War and what we are experiencing today. On the level of people's mentalities, the way they viewed the world, how could you try to explain to a contemporary audience why religion, why things like who the Holy Roman Emperor were, happened to be, why were these things so important that they could lead to such a bloody conflict?
So the thing to remember about these people that we're describing is that they believed in God as a social reality in a way that we do not. Like we
Right.
still have these religious forms that we have filled with social meaning, but that is a fundamentally different social meaning. A percentage of belief that was part of our understanding of the world around us has been privatized and internalized, and capitalism and Protestantism and capitalism help push us through that process and give birth to this new type of subjectivity that we inhabit. So the thing to remember is these people believed in God in a way that is really inaccessible, certainly for people trying to describe it in the secular public marketplace of ideas that we all inhabit now. Because of this, their cultural and social lives, which were as rich with symbol and ritual and spectacle as ours, were entirely devoted to religious imagery and religious concepts. We think of all the things that everybody cares about so deeply now: politics, identities, nations,
Sports ball.
and what we want in our entertainment. All of that was provided by religion at that time. Like the entire social life was based on religious observance, church festivals, carnivals, feast days. That is what defined social life. And so what the Lutheran Reformation does is creates this printed culture that is able to abstract that relationship away from a physical culture of ritual reaffirmation in a community to an individual practice of symbolic representation where you're sitting with a book.
Mhm.
And that is now replacing a public affirmation of religious belief and faith to a private one. But that process, it's happening in different places at different times, and the conflict that emerges between the people who are moving towards that conception of Christ and of the social, and the people who are repelling away from it, that conflict generates the sides basically. But which one you choose is, of course, based on the material conditions that are generating that culture. And you have commercial economies emerging in the city-states of the Holy Roman Empire, in the Rhineland, and in the Low Countries especially, and in England, that create a new subjectivity out of this ferment and struggle.
It's